13.2 Contemporary issues in sport. The first issue that comes up when looking at football is violence. Violence is behaviour involving physical force that is intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. Historically, football was formed from a Middle Ages game called mob football, in which it was between two villages. The sport in medieval times was with as many participants as they wanted on each side. The objective of the sport was simple: to carry an inflated pigskin ball to the end of the opponent's town. The only rule for the sport was murder and manslaughter were strictly prohibited. Besides that, any means possible could be used to move the ball to the destination to win the game. The game was mainly played originally by peasants. However, it was the upper and middle classes who went to private schools and universities who started to introduce their own rules to the game, and this is how different forms of the sport were developed, like football, rugby, and American football. Violence in women's football has been a prevalent factor that is considered an issue within their sport. This is not to say there is no violence in women's football, however, it is saying that there's considerably less compared to other sporting events like men's football. Within men's football, violence has affected a wide range of people, including the players, fans, officials, and police forces. These players in football have been affected as the Euro 2000 fans, the England fans, were causing riots in the streets. This in turn led to English teams, the clubs and national team, to be banned from European competition for 4 years. This affected the players as it meant they were restricted to only being able to play domestic football, and the whole aim for many clubs is to reach the top 5 and play European football, and this couldn't be achieved within those years. The fans and police have been affected at equal levels in parallel with each other. This is because as fan trouble increases, the police level has to increase as well. And before there used to be near to no policing at football matches. This, however, encouraged the violence as it meant there was no one there to stop the fans from acting out. From this, more policing has been added through the 80s and 90s to prevent the violence getting out of hand. And nowadays, for heated games like derbies or cup finals, the away supporters are usually kettled by the police from the station to the stadium and back, so fans cannot break off and cause trouble. There is also an increase of policing around the stadiums, as so fans cannot leave their allocated sections to cause trouble inside the ground. And this has its effect on fans. That for the casual fan, it makes the experience a lot safer with the increased policing. That means more people are inclined to go. However, for the police force, it uses up large amount of police time every weekend, where they could be doing more productive things, as stopping football fans fighting should not be something they have to deal with. The reason violence happens so much at football games applies for both the men and women's game. Causes of violence of the football can stem from frustration and can be from the fans and players, with the opponent, and can be from the fans and the players, with the opponent being better than them, the team or the opponent playing dirty and not getting punished for it, frustration at the officials and not giving calls that they think they should, or even at themselves for their own performance. Violence can also come from the players if the coach subs them off and they think they don't deserve to be. And also some coaches are known to encourage violence and can rile their players up to be aggressive. The spectators can cause violence from the chants that are sung in the terraces, as they can contain racist, homophobic and xenophobic language, and can cause players or opposing fans to take offence, as it can start to get very personal at times. The emotion of the game can also cause violence. This is because if it's a big game like a cup final or against a rival, these games have heightened tensions and can cause emotions to spill over onto the pitch, causing violence. This goes for both the fans and the players and the coaches of the teams. This is because the fans want the bragging rights so they can be happy with their team, and also the players get emotional because they've grown up watching and supporting these clubs, or because they're passionate for the fans. This means that they put in 110%, but can cause them to do irrational things like getting violent. Pressure can come from the fans and the coaches, or even the players' sponsors, as they expect them to perform well every game as it's their job. And this high level of expected performance for the individual can cause players to crack and do something out of character as they struggle to cope with the demanding pressure. One way of which they can act out is through violence, as it is known to let off steam and is also a very easy thing to do, like to go straight to. as it can be let out in many different ways. The positive and negative effects of violence in football is, although violence is never a good thing to have happen, there are positives to it occurring. One of those is that violence within the sport has allowed everyday common people to let off steam and let their anger out in an albeit unhealthy way, but it's still healthier than keeping it in and never letting it out whatsoever. And it's also an outlet for many people over the weekend, just so they can let go and forget about their jobs and stuff. As it also gives them a sense of anonymity, as they're part of a collective instead of being an individual. However, there are many more negatives to this violence occurring, how it does, with things like broken bones, losing jobs, and even deaths in extreme cases, as some people did not know when to stop with it. This violence can be a result in jail time if caught and banned from stadiums all over the world. And if people are banned from stadiums, this can make things worse, and it means they no longer have places to go and vent their anger and frustration, and leads to a much unhealthier lifestyle. Things have changed over time with violence in football, with harsher sanctions being introduced to the players conducting the actions and the spectators causing and taking part in it. By doing this, it created a deterrent from causing violence within the game. One of the main catalysts for the violence in football levels dropping was the ban in European competition for 4 years, as it did not affect individual clubs but instead affected the whole country and made people realise that they did not need to be causing such violence all the time, and began to see levels drop. Changes had to happen, as in football, violence was so prominent and linked with the sport that they were going hand in hand. This had to change, as if it didn't, things would be out of control at this point, and the men's sport would have to be started to get abandoned by families and the casual viewers, as the matches were too much to go to a risk with their family. Within the women's game, there is not as much violence compared to the men's. However, women's games still feel the repercussions of what has happened and the trouble that's been caused in the men's game, with extra policing and safety aspects added to their game as well. There have been many initiatives introduced to help bring about change. These include things like groups like Kick It Out, which are there to stop aggressive, racist and homosexual abuse being used at football games, and can be used in any stadium in Europe. If there's an incident, it has to be reported, it has to be investigated by the club or relevant authorities. Another initiative clubs have put in place to help prevent fan violence is they keep their rowdy fans away from the away supporters so they cannot get to each other. They also have split up the most well-known fans that cause trouble, so they can find it harder to get together and cause trouble. The FA have also banned alcohol in the stands of stadiums to stop drinking on the terraces and lower the alcohol consumption in games. And with lower alcohol consumption, it results to less violence because there's not as much drunken behaviour. And they've also made it so CCTV is present in all stadiums in the Women's Super League and the top 4 men's football leagues, so that any violence that does happen can be watched back, and the instigators and people involved can be caught and given their just sanction. These changes have had a huge positive impact on the game, as violence levels have been dropping since many of their introductions, showing that the FA laws that they're introducing are actually working. Recommendations for future change would be that there be a total ban from alcohol in stadiums to prevent drinking in games, so that the level of drunken violence or alcohol-incited violence would drop down to near nothing, and this would be a huge change in the game.